Hello and welcome back to Survey of Biology, and here is our second topic in our photosynthesis unit. So the first one, if you remember, we did an overview of electromagnetic radiation and what is light and the energy. We talked about photons. We talked about how the color that we see off objects is actually the wavelengths of photons being reflected from them. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to tie that right into photosynthesis, and we're going to look at something called the photosystems. So here is how the photons actually get absorbed by the plants. And you can see in the picture here we've got two different photons. We've got kind of a violet one on top showing a higher frequency, it's a little bit higher energy, and a green one right below that with a longer wavelength and lower energy with that. So let's jump right into it and look at this. So a photon, if you remember from last discussion, we talked about was a discrete packet of light energy. And so if we look at this leaf here, we talked about how white light comes in, which is the entire rainbow, Roy G. Biv, and usually green light will be reflected. That's why we see a leaf as being green, but the blues and the reds get absorbed. So if you look at the diagram down here, this is something called a photosystem. And a photosystem is an array. It's kind of like a solar panel of pigments, a lot of them being chlorophyll, the one that you're probably most familiar with. And what these photosystems do, they'll absorb photons of different wavelengths, and in the case of photosynthesis, blue and red being the dominant ones because the green is being reflected. So what happens is these photons are absorbed by these pigments and they channel all that energy, and that's where the solar energy is collected. So if we look again at this diagram that we've seen before, the red and the blue will come in. They get absorbed by the chloroplasts in the plant, and they don't get reflected. What does get reflected is the green, so that energy is not being used. So we want to see, okay, what's happening right in here? Why is that red and blue not being reflected back? What's happening to those photons? And what's happening is they're hitting these things called photosystems. And in this case, the photosystem is an array. We can kind of think of it as all of these together right here of pigments. A lot of them are chloroplasts. There's keratins, anthocyanins. But the big one, the green one that I want you to remember right now is chlorophyll. And so the photons are used to raise electrons to an excited state. So what will happen is a photon comes in and it hits a chlorophyll molecule. And it gives the energy to that chlorophyll. And it starts kind of vibrating, and all the energy gets channeled. So all of these chlorophyll molecules in this kind of antenna complex, they funnel all of their energy to one molecule, and that's called the reaction center. And once all that energy makes it to the reaction center, it's usually enough energy where it will excite an electron. So an electron gets bumped to a higher energy state, and that goes up to something that we call the primary acceptor. And this is the start of photosynthesis. So this is the conversion of the solar energy. Here's where we're collecting it with these chlorophyll molecules and using it to bump an electron to a higher energy state. And if we look at these two diagrams, we can kind of see where this all happens. So over on the left, here's your antenna complex. So here's what I talked about, a group of pigments being together, mostly chlorophyll. So a photon comes in right here, and it bounces around between different pigments until it gets channeled to the reaction center. And all of those together will bump an electron up. So now this photosystem is located in the thylakoid membrane. So if we look over on the right now, here's what a chloroplast looks like. And again, we're seeing kind of the same theme where light comes in, green light gets reflected out, and the blue and the red get absorbed in. So what happens is right on these membranes right here, so if we look at one of these stacks, that I'll outline one of them right there, that's the thylakoid membrane. That's where these photosystems are embedded and it takes place. And so all of the solar energy gets funneled to the reaction center, which is usually chlorophyll A, and that's where we're going to start photosynthesis. And this is showing the wavelengths called the absorption spectrum of plants. And you can see The highest peaks, here's our chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll B is related, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. And where are they doing most of their work? Where are they absorbing most of their energy? And you can see it's down the bottom here. It's in the blue and it's in the red. The chlorophyll isn't absorbing much in the green. That's why we see it getting reflected. Now, phycoerythrin, if we look that in the middle, there's a big word for you. That's another pigment that some plants have. It does absorb in the green, okay? And it reflects the red, so it appears to be a red color. Now, when might we see that pigment, or the carotenes that are kind of a little bit more orange in color? When might we see those? Well, in plants, we see them around here in Vermont in the fall. As the leaves start to turn, the chlorophyll is removed, and we get the carotenes, the phycoethrins. Those are left behind, and that's why we see the beautiful colors that we get in the fall, because of these different pigments that are left over at that time of year. And here is on the left, here's a molecule of chlorophyll A. And I just, you don't have to remember this, but I just want you to see what it looks like. And the big thing is, it's got this magnesium ion right in the middle. And if we look at it down in the lower right here, we'll see that this chlorophyll molecule looks an awful lot like hemoglobin that we have in our body to transport blood. The big difference being our hemoglobin has iron in the middle, and plants use magnesium. So again, just kind of for your reference to see what it is that we're talking about here, here's what the chlorophyll molecule looks like. Now, what does this all mean? If we put these photosystems together, here we go. So in plants, here's this diagram. There's two photosystems that function in photosynthesis. There's photosystem 2, which is actually the first one because it was discovered second, but it's the first one in terms of going through linearly. And then there's photosystem 1, which is the first one discovered, and some primitive plants only use photosystem 1. But what happens is, if we start here on the left at photosystem 2, water is split to produce the oxygen given off and to replace the excited electrons. So this is why photosynthesis needs water. We're going to split that water, and we're going to use it to give off the oxygen that plants give off. That's what humans and animals will breathe in. But it also provides the electrons that are excited from those reaction centers. And so what happens is that excited electron is then used as it travels through something called the electron transport chain right here to produce a molecule of ATP. That's what plants and animals can use for energy. It hits photosystem 1, those electrons get excited a second time, and then they then travel downhill giving off energy, and they produce another molecule of something called NADPH. Now those two molecules, ATP and NADPH, are going to be very important, as we're going to see, because they carry the energy from the sunlight to the next step of photosynthesis. And if we look at it in a schematic here of work being done with these workers here, and so we have down here in the lower left, we have light energy being added, and you can see we've got the water splitting photosystem. So these electrons are energized, they're excited up to a high level. The workers then pass those electrons off, and we can think of them as kind of spinning a turbine or pumping hydrogens, and they produce ATP, and they lose some of their energy in that process. Well, we add some more photons right here, some more light energy. Those electrons get excited to an even higher energy state right here, and by passing those electrons off, we can then produce molecules of NADPH. And it's those two molecules that we're going to follow in our next installment when we look at something called the light-independent reaction. So this, what we've basically just looked at, is something called the light-dependent reaction, because we need sunlight in order to do it. And what we end up with is ATP and NADPH. So all of you who like green, you're in luck as we go through for the next couple units in this. So again, thank you for your time.